Dear Latinos, let's have another chat. I didn't forget about y'all. But even since my last video where I chose to call out the colorism in our own communities, which of course didn't land well with a lot of Latino people, I don't care. This one's not going to land well with them either. A lot has happened that is further proving our points. You couldn't pay me to watch an episode of Love Island. Sorry, it's not my thing. But a lot of the Latino contestants came under fire, got booted out or whatever they did for racist tweets, comments, actions, which tracks. Now, I'm not trying to blame any specific Latin group, but we all know that the Cubans have not been shy about their support against the Cheeto Man. And they were the group that voted for him well over 50%, the only group that voted for him well over 50%. But what happens in the past month or so? Their ass is getting picked up too, because he revoked the humanitarian parole program, which I think in their minds kept them safe, right? Because he went back on his word. He promised them that they weren't going to get deported, that he wasn't going to come after the Cubans, and he did. Ooh, shocker there. He also implemented a travel ban, a restricted travel ban to Cuba as well. Cuba wasn't the only one. It was Haiti, Venezuela, and I think Nicaragua too. But I mean, we're talking about the Cubans specifically right there. There's been like videos circulating on TikTok, Instagram, YouTube of journalists doing interviews with ICE agents because they're coming under fire, right? People are beating them up, they're getting shot at, like it's not doing well for the, morale of ICE agents, and a lot of them have been Latino men. And I'm like, okay, Uncle Juan. I came up with that one. Another girl said Tio Tom, which I kind of like that better, but that's how I'm going to refer to Latino Republicans, as Tio Toms and Uncle Juans. And the women are Yolandas, and that one doesn't have to be, talked about. I think the people get that reference. But it all tracks, doesn't it? I think what puzzles me the most about the Latino community right now is when journalists and people do interviews with Latino people and why they voted for, the overgrown Cheeto. It's one of three things, right? It's the economy, it's safer borders, it's, a morality issue, which all three of those, I guffaw. I laugh when people say those things, but let's break them down one by one. The economy. Look, I did my little research, right? And yes, if you made $400,000 or more in this country, the Democrats wanted to tax you more. And they were already getting taxed. I think it was people who made $350,000 or more. And I decided to look up the percentages on people, not just Latinos, people in this country who make $400,000 or more in America a year. Do you know what that percentage is? Less than 2%. 1.8% to be exact. Do you know what percentage of Latino people make $400,000 or more? What percentage of that 1.8%? A number so small I couldn't even find it. Okay, so you weren't invited to that conversation to get taxed more, right? Now, on the other side of that, an even smaller percentage of Latinos own massive corporations where they would have benefited off of tax breaks, right? Where they were in the good old boy club, the one percenters who vote a certain way, who do certain things because they don't pay their fair share of taxes, if they pay taxes at all. You weren't invited to that conversation either, because that's an even smaller percentage of Latinos. So on both sides of the spectrum, babes, they weren't talking to you. We were not invited to that conversation. So for you to say the economy, what? No. Now, safer borders. Who are we trying to lock out? Where people think that if these people were not here, our country would be safer. It's not the Canadian border, right? It's not the Asians and the Middle Eastern people that come on the West Coast. It's not the Scandinavian people and the Slavic people that come from the East Coast. It's the Mexican border. So when Latino people said, they wanted to vote, they were voting a certain way because they wanted safer borders. That was a direct hit towards Mexicans. They weren't talking about any other demographic. They weren't even talking about little Cuba, right? You have the Cubans coming on the Floridian side, right? They weren't talking about them either. That was a blatant prejudice attack against Mexicans. A lot of the Latinos that voted a certain way, and even a third of Mexican people voted for the same way when they knew that this was a direct attack against their own people. They weren't shy during the election cycle with their mass deportation signs. And I'm just like, really? When I think about Mexicans versus other groups of Latino people, I'm like, what they say about us is the same. What they think about us is the same. So when you say you want to protect our borders, and let's just keep it 100, you're talking about Mexicans, you want to keep Mexicans out, they're essentially talking about every other demographic, Latino demographic as well. And I feel like, certain demographics of Latino people didn't get that. And that's just because they're prejudiced against Mexican people. And I'm sorry to say that, but they are. It has been my own personal experiences. Again, I'm adopted. I grew up in Florida, so on the East Coast, and I was surrounded more by Caribbean Spanish people than I was Mexican people. And I have heard on multiple occasions the things that these other Latino groups have said about Mexican people, because you look at me and the first thing that you're going to think of is not Mexican. So I don't think that they thought I was Mexican, so they felt very comfortable saying these ridiculously racist and deplorable things about Mexicans. I have not seen a bigger crash out from a non-Mexican Latino man or a non-Mexican Latino woman when they get called Mexican. And then all of a sudden the floodgates come open, and all the racism and all the slurs that get, thrown at Mexicans come out of their mouths. And I'm just sitting here having to grin and bear it because, I grew up in the church too. So a lot of these people were Christian folks, and I'm over here just trying to keep a smile on my face, trying to keep it, PC until I got older. And I would be like, hey, I'm Mexican and I don't appreciate that you're saying that. And so this all tracks for me, right? It's nothing new because a lot of non-Mexican Latino people are racist and prejudiced towards Mexican people. And so I wanted to do a little research project because I really wanted to see where that came from. I was like, did Mexico do something to the Caribbean islands? Did Mexico do something to South Americans? Which, okay, yeah, South Americans maybe a little bit, Mexicans were conquerors back in the day, and they conquered a lot of, South America, and there's a lot of indigenous people and a lot of, I guess, lineage, I don't know what other word I can say it, that stems from Mexico in South America. So even that prejudice doesn't make sense to me, because it's like we all come from, all the South Americans come from the same place. So I couldn't really find, one specific event. I couldn't find, anything that was factual based, or, what I mean, to just understand why a lot of Caribbean Spanish people, South American people are so prejudiced against Mexicans specifically. And this election showed that, because again, to my point, when they were saying mass deportations now, we all knew they were talking about Mexicans. Where the Latino people failed to understand is that the powers that be in America see us all the same. They view us all the same. So when they said mass deportations, they weren't going to ask you, hey, are you Mexican? Hey, are you Puerto Rican? Hey, are you Venezuelan? No. They see a Latino man, they're snatching him up. Latino women, snatching him up. They're even snatching up Latino children. They're not asking if they're Mexican. They're not even asking if, they're undocumented or not, because legal citizens have been snatched up and sent to concentration camps and deportation centers too. So that is just stemmed in their racism. That's stemmed in their prejudice. And that is in the Latino community as well. Now, there's a buzzword going around in the brown communities, both Black and Latino communities. And that buzzword is monolith. That a lot of Latino people do not appreciate the fact that they are getting put into one giant box when they are from different places. They have different customs and cultures and this and that or whatever. And I always want to be like, what box are you referring to? What stereotypes are you referring to? What is it about what white Americans, right? America is saying about Latino people that you don't like, therefore you want to be separated from the Latino community. And I could never get these people to say it out loud, because I'm sorry, in America, the vast majority of Latino people are Mexican. And the vast majority of stereotypes come from Mexico. And again, to my freaking point, and I will say this a million times in this video, the powers that be in this country do not differentiate us. They see us all the same. They put the same stereotypes on all of us. What stereotype are you referring to? What box are you referring to? I can never get them just to say it. It was Mexico, Mexicans. It was. You can't tell me any different. Now, I do agree that, you know, as Latino people, we shouldn't be considered one giant monolith, because we are different. We do come from, you know, different places and whatever. But the thing is I don't necessarily view it as such a bad thing to be seen as a monolith, especially in a country that is prejudiced against us. So if we could have only, you know, brought ourselves together as Latino peoples to fight against these prejudices and against racism and against, you know, the broken systems in America that keep us down, we wouldn't be in this position that we are currently. But because all the Latino demographics and groups are fighting amongst themselves, are prejudiced against one another. I just saw another video that, you know, the Caribbean Spanish people are mad at Colombian people because they're stealing their like Afro-Latino cultures and customs. And I wasn't like, I didn't know that. I was like, really? Like, that's news to me. But what I want Latino people to understand, that in America, we are a giant monolith, and we need to start acting like it, because we will never get to a point in this country where we can separate ourselves and differentiate ourselves until we come together and do what the Black community is doing. The Black community is separating themselves. They have stopped chasing this idea that they can be in close proximity to whiteness. They have stopped, for the most part, right? Like, the Black community is not perfect. They have stopped fighting amongst each other. Like, the things that they're fighting now are stupid, frivolous shit that, you know, hey, they'll work it out. But because we're so divided in the Latino community, that is why we are here. And a lot of that division, a lot of that hatred, a lot of that prejudice is towards Mexican people. And again, I tried to do my research and I couldn't figure out why. And then it dawned on me, because of other things that I'll get to, is when you live amongst certain groups of people in America, you start thinking the same, right? Are you catching my drift? When you are still chasing that proximity to whiteness, you are going to drink up, and you are going to essentially get brainwashed into thinking these negative stereotypes. All in the same while, they were talking about 65 million new meals that were going to be sent to alligator Alcatraz for the alligators. There's only 10 to 12 undocumented peoples in this country. So who were the other 50 to 65 million people that they were talking about? Other Latinos. I bring up brainwashing. I bring up the proximity to whiteness because I would have thought that hearing Mexican specifically, right? Because I've been accused of not calling out Mexico. And I'm like, you're not listening then. I would have thought that for decades, hearing your people being referred to as rapists and disease-ridden, as criminals, would do it for me. Yes, a third of Mexicans still voted for the overgrown Cheeto man, and they voted against, hilariously, specifically their own interests. I would have thought that getting your homeland called a floating pile of garbage in the middle of the ocean would have done it for me. Yet, you know, I'm going to do like groups like 35 to 37% of Puerto Ricans still voted against their own interests, voted for the Cheeto Man. I don't like election results on the internet because I look at different sources and they say different percentages. So I'm just going to do like groups, 42 to 46% of Latino people voted for the Cheeto Man. 35 to 37% of Puerto Ricans voted for the Cheeto Man. I bring up Puerto Rico specifically right now, and I'm gonna go there, and I don't care because I've been, attacked by Puerto Ricans as of late just because you saw Gavin Newsom, which, he's not the hero we wanted. He's the hero that is here. And he was already sending aid to Puerto Rico before Hurricane was it Aaron, I think? And so, you're seeing, the news threads reporting on it. You're seeing social media talking about it. And then, of course, I go to the comments and people are just remember, though, 37% of y'all voted against. And, of course, you see the Puerto Ricans coming, to attack other people for this. And so I had one comment that was, said to me specifically that, they vote a certain way because of 100 years of blah, blah, blah. And so I wasn't really, specifically aware of the conflict between the U.S. and Puerto Rico, so I did my research, and what I found was a little bit interesting. Long story short, in Puerto Rico, I found it interesting that this one comment, right? This one woman, this one girl, saying she votes a certain way because fuck America, and, for things that happened over 100 years ago. And so, again, was not familiar with the conflict, and they were using, the Puerto Rican Islands as bomb testing sites, and they've done Puerto Rico dirty. So I you are right to feel the way that you feel. But what I found interesting is that the past voting cycles in Puerto Rico, over 50% of them, they have crossed that threshold where over 50% of them want to secede to America and become a state. This past voting cycle, it was 51-48%, which that's very, very close. The Republican president, though, is still making up excuses because he wants more of a voter turnout before he codifies these type of results. And I'm that's not how it's done in other countries, right? You don't have to have a certain percentage of people that vote. It's the people that vote, and that's what happens. I personally, I don't have a specific opinion. That is not my homeland. I do think that a lot of Puerto Rican Puerto Rican citizens vote against their own interests, but the interests of their people back home. And that's why I get attacked when I say that. But besides the fact, what I found interesting, though, is this past election cycle, they did a fake election. Now, as a reminder, the people of Puerto Rico cannot vote in American elections, but they did a full election, and the overwhelmingly vast majority of them voted for Kamala Harris, voted Democratic. I think it was 70 to 75%, crazy. So it's interesting that a Republican president sees that his people are more Democratic, that they would vote more, on the blue side. Can't find reasons to codify their own elections on what they would want to do. I don't have an opinion just because I'm not an economist. So I don't know if Puerto Rico could, survive on their own. I don't know. I know what I hear, and I'm just, that's just hearsay. I don't know. I know that their economy struggles. So I don't know, for the people that are voting that they want to stay independent and be their own, island, I don't know if that would work. I also, if they became another state of America, I don't have an exact opinion on that. I go with what the people want. If the majority of people want to be a state, then have at it. The thing is, of the stuff that I was reading, in a Republican-led Senate, Congress, all, they're the people that make the decisions to actually bring it up and make this happen, Puerto Rico secede to America and make them part of America. That wouldn't happen under a Republican Congress, because if they know that the majority of those people would vote Democratic, why would they? They wouldn't have many electoral votes, but we all know Republicans like to cheat. So I found that interesting when I just did a simple Google search on the history of things, yet people still have their opinions. But it's just interesting that once you become part of America, like your stateside, you essentially get brainwashed into thinking that you can be like the 1%. And it's interesting because then you in turn vote against not only your own interests, but the interests of your people back home. Like, and I'm saying specifically like Puerto Ricans, because obviously Puerto Ricans can't get deported, right? Like they are the only Latino group that is essentially safe now. But I say that about the Mexicans as well, y'all stupid. Growing up with a lot of Caribbean Spanish, I grew up with like Cubans, and I've heard this over and over. Cubans vote Republican because they see the Democratic Party too close to communism, which, they had their horror stories on what happened in Cuba, which I'm like, you can't compare the Democratic Party with what Fidel Castro did. And if we're talking about dictators, I was like, the closest thing that America has had to a dictator is the overgrown Cheeto man. So I'm sorry, that doesn't make sense, because the thing about democratic socialism, the groups of people that would benefit off of that the most are brown groups, are Latino groups. So again, hilariously voting against your own interests and then being shocked and befuddled that these people didn't keep their word on what they said they were gonna do. Like, whatever. And this is shown with a lot of ICE agents being Latino men. It's like, you sold your souls for what? Now, I'm sorry, correct me if I'm wrong, but ICE agents don't seem like the sharpest tools in the shed where they would need to get student loans forgiven. They didn't go to college. They didn't go to technical school. They don't look like that demographic, okay? Whatever. You're not even getting the sign-on bonuses. Like, that's being reported left and right. They're making excuses as to why, you're not getting your 50 or 60 grand as your sign-on bonus. So you're not even getting that money. So it's just because, what? You're racist. You're prejudiced. You are chasing that proximity to whiteness. This was like a nail in the coffin with a friendship that I was trying to make work, but I just like, I don't stay around too long with people, who are weird. But we were in the car and we were driving somewhere, and she was telling me that she understands why a lot of Mexicans specifically, because she was Mexican, I'm half Mexican, whatever. She understands why people come to this country and vote a certain way, because when you're coming from your homeland, when you're coming from a different country, like, you come here and the first thing you want is community. You want a sense of belonging. And my rebuttal was like, but why would you want to find community in people that would deport you right back to where you came from, who have such negative things to say about you, who see you as lesser? When I think of proximity to whiteness, I also think of the American dream that no longer exists, right? And so, okay, fine. It's not necessarily the proximity to whiteness. It's the proximity to the American dream that you see more white people have than people that look like you. But the thing is that, number one, that American dream doesn't even exist for white folks, right? We've had to change the definition of the American dream and what we see as the American dream, but also a lot of them see you as lesser. I saw, this video, and it's been talked about how white people, again, 1.2% or 1.8% of people in America make over 400K. So meaning 98% of us don't make that, but yet a lot of people vote against their own interests economically. The internet's a wild place these days, where people have a lot of pump up in their chest to say whatever. And so that has been confirmed because white people have said that. They have tweeted it, they have threaded it, they have made TikToks about it, that they would rather burn down a system that they could potentially benefit from if that also meant that brown and black people benefited. Which, okay, that's strange. How I view Latino people who vote against their own interests is, it is being brought to light that a lot of Latino people are also racist against black people, right? That they're also prejudiced against certain groups of their own people. So how I view them in voting against their own interest is that they want to see brown people succeed as a whole. They just don't want them to do better than what they're doing, right? So they vote a certain way. They try to, you know, be buddy buddy with the people who are in charge of these systems, in the hopes that they themselves might get bettered, they might benefit, but leave the other brown groups, you know, to their own. And that's just not what is happening. Now, morality, right? A lot of Latino people are religious. They're Catholic, they're Pentecostal, they're Christian, they're whatever, which is hilarious because it doesn't matter if you're Latino. Whenever someone says morality, I'm like, you voted for a felon, so that gets thrown out the window. You voted for a predator, you voted for a con man. Your morality, you have no morality if you were okay with that. Your morality is now null and void, okay? So that one, it's like, no, sorry, you're not going to win me over that you vote a certain way, that you voted for a certain person because you felt like he had a more moral compass than you see the Democrat side, just because they do celebrate and appreciate and want, you know, equal rights in marriage equality and trans rights and, you know, all these other marginalized groups of people. And if you're super religious, if you have come from a very closed-minded atmosphere, of course you're going to see that as like, oh no, like, you know, that's just too far left, as they say. And I'm just like, but you voted for a predator against the most sensitive groups, against women and children. So sorry, you're not going to win me over on that one.